Well, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see everyone, of course, who's here in person, and everyone on Zoom. Hello, hello. And I apologize that last week's recording was not posted. It did save. I just didn't get around to uploading it, so it'll get there. But tonight's class, hello, sweetie. Nice to see you. But tonight's class is on this week's Torah portion, which obviously is a continuation of last week's Torah portion, but a completely individual topic. So each class stands alone on its own, but shares a common thread of continuity. So this week, we are in Parshat Chayei Sara. It is in the book of Bereshit. We're in the first book. And we are learning about the story of the end of Sarah's life. The Torah portion begins with Sarah passing away and continues through the life of her children, well, her child, Yitzchak. And today what we're going to focus on is the details surrounding the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, the beauty of the story surrounding this event, and the way that we can find ourselves in this story, and the way that we can relate to the individuals in the story to bring their lessons into our lives. As we said, tonight's discussion is meaningful and relatable, so we're going to bring it into our own lives. So let's begin with the history of Yitzchak. We spoke last week how Sara gave birth, and she was at a very advanced age when she gave birth. In fact, to the point that when she heard that she would have a child, she laughed because it was crazy to think that she would have a baby. She was so old. She was 90 years old when she gave birth. And Yitzchak, her son, was 37 when she passed away. And he was not married yet. And it was right after the events of the Akedat Yitzchak, which is the event that happened, which was test number 10 of Abraham, which 2 weeks ago we spoke about the challenges and the tests that Abraham endured. The last test that Abraham was faced with was the command that he was given by God to sacrifice his own child. And he traveled to the mountain with his son Yitzchak, and they went, and he was ready to sacrifice his son on an altar and kill him for the sake of God. And obviously we know that he didn't go through with it. God was not expecting him to actually go through with it. God was just testing him. And at the last moment, God said, stop. Now I know that you are completely faithful if you're ready to give up your own child, and not just the life of his own child, but all the promises of continuity of a nation. The inheritance to be passed on was only through Yitzchak. It was his only child who was able to receive this inheritance. And Yitzchak and Abraham, when they traveled back home after this event, when Sarah heard about it, such a shocking event, and she was 127 years old, the shock of hearing that her own child was almost sacrificed was actually what made her pass away. And that was the end of her life. And it was a very dramatic situation surrounding this situation. And now Abraham is himself, he's at the end of his life, but his son is not married. In order for his son to carry on his legacy, he needs to start his own family. And Abraham needs to find a shidduch for his son. He needs to find a woman for his son to marry. Now, the people around them were not of the caliber that Yitzchak deserved and would be a perfect match for him. But Yitzchak was a very, very holy soul. And especially being that he had been put on an altar to be a sacrifice, he had a very, very high spiritual stature, and he was not allowed to leave the Holy Land. His entire life was in Eretz Israel, which then was called Eretz Canaan. Now, Avram traveled plenty in his life. Yaakov, who will come later on, also traveled plenty in his life, but Yitzchak never left the land of Israel. Problem was, there were no eligible girls for him there. So what are we going to do? So Abraham sends his right-hand man, his servant Eliezer, who was not just a servant who did work around the house, but his assistant, his right-hand man, his confidant, the person that he completely trusted. He sent him to the city where his own family lived, which was the city of Haran, and he instructed Eliezer to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. Now, Abraham knew that there would be someone who would be a perfect fit for Yitzchak, but those were the instructions. Find someone from my family. It should stay in the family. He should be someone who follows the same beliefs. And Yitzchak will be able to get married. So Eliezer travels. Abraham sends him off with a whole caravan of camels laden with gifts, jewelry, beautiful things to give the prospective wife of his son Yitzchak. And Eliezer travels on his way. And Eliezer gets to the city of Haran, and he goes to the city square. Now, imagine if you were, in a major office building, or I use the example of a school because that's where I work. But let's say you want to go to the school and you're looking for a certain staff member. Your first place would be go to the staff lounge because that's where everybody congregates, right? Or in the office, go to the break room where everybody congregates, or wherever you are. So in a city, you don't really find it as much because nowadays people live in their own homes. But in a smaller town, go to the city square or the farmer's market or something. That's where you'll find everybody congregated. In those days, that was the well. The well in the center of the city, everybody would come to draw water. So you're looking for someone, you go to the well. The well is where you get water. Exactly. So go to the well. Either you'll find someone at the well, you'll find someone who can tell you where to go. It's a good place to meet everyone. And he settles at the well. And he's sitting at the well. And how's he going to know who to choose? What would be the best way to narrow down his search? Now, he has one criteria, someone from Avram's family. What do you think, if you were Eliezer, would be the best way to narrow down your search for a girl? Feel free to unmute yourselves. Share, what do you think? Okay, someone that looks humble. Okay, what else? Gotta find a girl. What are you gonna do? Who are you gonna ask for? The mayor, okay. The rabbi, okay, yeah. So you're gonna ask people to try to narrow down your search. Now, it would seem logical that he would ask, who here is from Avram's family? And then from the people who are part of Avram's family, go in and say, of the single girls, now let's see who's good for Yitzchak. But narrow down the search. Eliezer does nothing of the sort. What does he do? Sits at the well, and he starts having a chat with God. You can tell he works for Avram long enough, right? He's part of this understanding of a connection with God. He has a chat with God. What does he say? God, please send me a sign for who is the right girl for Yitzchak. And what does he say? Send me a sign for someone who is kind. A kind woman. That's who we're looking for. And he sits at the well waiting for a sign. A young girl comes over to him and says, excuse me, you look like you just, and again, I'm paraphrasing, this isn't a quote. You look like you just traveled from far. Can I get you some water? He says, yes, thank you. And in the back of his mind, he was asking for a sign for someone who's kind. And the microphone's not on here now. Someone who's offering water sounds like someone who's kind, but she goes even further. She says, can I bring you water for your camels as well? I see you have many camels. Thank you. She goes, she fills up her jug. She brings him water. And then she keeps filling up water and bringing water to his camels. Now, if this is not a sign, I don't know what is. This was the perfect sign for the wife for Yitzchak. So Eliezer says, who are you? Which family are you from? And she ends up telling him where he's from. Definitely, she is from Avram's family. And Eliezer goes to the home of Rivka, meets her father. Her mother had already passed away, but her father and her brother, Betuel and Lavan. And he offers a proposition. I'd like to take your daughter, your sister, home with me to marry Yitzchak, Abraham's son. And she goes. And she says, yes, that's it. She's out. Now, we are looking at a person who is trying to find the perfect match. And what is the first thing he looks for? Kindness. He looks for kindness. Not first who is in the family and now let's make sure that she is kind. No. First, we look for kindness, and then we see if everything else surrounding fits. Why? Because who a person is on the inside is so much more important than the family they come from, the financial status that they have, the other abilities and talents that they may or may not have. First and foremost, the character of a person is what is most important. What's on the inside? Her kindness. And it's interesting because in our lives, we make acquaintance with people all the time, whether it's in a work-related situation or in our home life, it's with neighbors, it's potentially someone to date or marry, whatever it is. We're constantly meeting people. And sometimes, depending on the purpose of why we're trying to meet someone, we forget what's most important about a person. So imagine a person who is trying to find an exercise partner, or someone who's trying to find a business partner on varying levels of importance in the relationship, but any partner or a life partner. Often, we try to convince ourselves that the character is good because we like everything else that we see. For example, a person who you want to start a business with, you really like their resume, their past experiences, their whatever it is, and you are so stuck on the externals of what they have that you convince yourself, oh, really, they're honest. Even though in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, they're not really so honest. They're not really so compatible with my personality. But because all the externals are good, they're from the right company, they have the right anything, they're on the right list of Fortune 500, whatever it is. So we tell ourselves, oh, they're for sure going to be honest, even though not really. A partnership like that doesn't usually work because the externals are all meaningless if the character is not there. The same is with even as simple as someone you want to exercise with. Tell yourself, oh, she has a great gym membership, or she has really cool exercise clothing. I'm going to look really cool if I go walking with her or go jogging with her or go biking with her, whatever it is. But you don't enjoy her company. because she's rude or because she's not friendly or she's not kind, whatever it is, it's not going to be an enjoyable partnership. And definitely with a life partner. Sometimes a person wants to, get married or marry off their child or whatever, suggest a match, and you see, but the family is so perfect. Or they have so much money, right? There's so many variables, but it's not really a kind person, or it's not a humble person, or doesn't share the same values as me. And you convince yourself, but he's from the right family, we'll figure it out. Or he's so rich, we'll figure it out. A relationship like that cannot really be sustainable. And even if it lasts, it's not a healthy relationship if the character isn't there. So what Eliezer was doing is actually forming a blueprint for us on how to find a partner, how to form a relationship. In fact, the match between Yitzchak and Rivka is actually the first couple in the Torah that we hear about the process of their marriage. Like we hear about their being set up, their dating. Obviously, they weren't dating the way we think of dating nowadays, but the introduction, it's the first time we hear about it. It's the first shidduch in the Torah. Adam and Chava, well, they were the only two, and God introduced them. So perfect matchmaker, right? Avram and Sara, when we are introduced to them, they are already married. Yitzchak and Rivka is the first time we hear about what somebody should look for in a marriage, other than the only other person that exists in the world, which was Adam and Chava. So this is not just a story in the Torah, but it's actually a blueprint for us to look at and say, well, how do we form a relationship? What should we look for in a relationship? And again, that's a life partner and any other real lasting relationship, whether it's a friendship, again, a partnership, any other type of relationship it is, meaningful or just casual. Kindness, character, who the person is on the inside. Not what they are looking to get, but how they look to give to others. That's really the basis of the relationship. And only then can you look to see, well, what family do they come from? What's their financial status? Those things are not nothing. They're not nothing, but they are worthless if the character isn't there first. So they are worth it, but only if it's there first. I once heard something very beautiful. Somebody said the word that is used in Hebrew Yiddish is called yichus. Yichus is like lineage, like, where a person comes from. So especially in the religious world where people are, setting up their children, and again, nobody is forced into marriage, but, they set up their children with prospective dates for them to go out. And a lot of people are very concerned with the yichus of the person that they're going to marry. Who they're from, do they have any rabbis in their family, where do they come from, right? Which city in Morocco are they from? Things like that. So I heard somebody say yichus, lineage, is like a lot of zeros. It's worth nothing if there's no one before it. It could add on beautiful value to come from a beautiful family or have financial status, anything, but it's nothing if there's no one. It's just a bunch of zeros. What is the one that forms the basis of who a person is? It's their character. And we can look at this idea from how we build relationships, but also how to build our own relationship with ourselves, how to build our best self. Sometimes we're so consumed with creating a certain image or projecting a certain image of who we are, what our job is, and the way that we define ourselves. If I ask everyone to describe themselves, some people would describe themselves as, I am a professor, I am a businesswoman, I am a mother. These are all wonderful descriptions, but that's not a description of who you are. It's a description of what you do. Mother is who you are, but maybe. Who are you? What do you use to describe yourself? Really, if we think about ourselves, can I honestly and authentically describe myself as kind? Can I describe myself as compassionate? Can I describe myself as honest, as giving, as humble? Those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And am I focusing on that part of me to strengthen myself in those areas? No one is expected to be perfect, but we all need to be growing. So where are we strengthening ourselves? Are we strengthening ourselves in our financial status? Are we strengthening ourselves in our social status? Are we strengthening ourselves in our marketing, whatever it is? You know, if I had a marketing committee, if I want to market Severine, what am I putting out there? What is the ad? Imagine yourself, imagine a marketing company that's trying to market a certain product. They're going to describe the product in the most appealing way, but they also want to be honest so that people buy the product and they're not disappointed. Imagine you had an advertisement marketing you. What do you want that advertisement to say? Pearl, unmute yourself. I'm putting you on the spot. What do you want the advertisement about Pearl Abramowitz to say? Come on, share something.
Advertisements. I don't know.
What do you want it to say?
Caring person, looking for people in need.
Okay, a caring person who's looking for people in need. Now, when you write your own advertisement, think to yourself, if somebody meets me, is that what they're going to meet? Pearl, honest advertising, good marketing, because that's what I would meet if I would meet you. And I do meet you. But when we focus on that and we look at it from the perspective of who am I to other people, it's not just about what do people think of me. It's more about how do I want to be seen and how do I want to really see myself when I look in the mirror. That's called character building. And that is the most important part of a person. So yes, the job titles, the money, the fun things, the wardrobe, those are all a bunch of zeros. The one is the character. And that's what we need to look for in other people and surround ourselves with people like that. And be that person that other people will want to be around. Not for the sake of the other people, but for the sake of ourselves. And that ripples an effect into our loved ones, our surroundings, because then we can have a positive effect because we are that character. And that is why Eliezer first asked God, show me someone kind, because the rest will fall into place. Show me someone who gives of themselves, who doesn't come to the well and sees, what can I take for myself? How am I going to benefit from this situation? But look around. Who needs water? Who looks like they were traveling? Who looks like they need someone to give them a drink? And not just them, but the camels. And remember, camels can drink for a long time. Camels can also walk over to the well and help themselves. But no, she's not focused on, I'm only going to help if help is needed. She's focused on, let me see who I can help. That shows her character. Now, the beauty and the specialty of Rivka's kindness becomes even more beautiful when you know where she came from. Rivka's family was liars, cheaters, dishonest, sneaky people. That was her family. In fact, her brother Lavan was extremely, extremely sly. We're going to see in future Torah portions coming up, although many of you may know the story, that Yaakov, who will be the children, as again, we're not learning the story of the parsha in order. We're focusing on stories, so it's fine if we skip out of the order. But Yaakov, who was Yitzchak and Rivka's son, ended up living in Lavan's home, and he ended up marrying Lavan's daughters. And when Yaakov was working for his father-in-law Lavan, who was also his uncle, he was cheated by his own father-in-law. Lavan would manipulate the flock to make sure that Yaakov would get less animals in his possession. And he had a whole system of how he did that. So if Lavan is someone who would later be able to cheat his own son-in-law, which means he's cheating his own daughters because it's their financial stability, imagine the kind of person we're dealing with. Now, Bethuel, the father of Rivka, and Lavan, the brother, when Eliezer came to the home of Rivka and her family to speak with them about taking Rivka with her, and that she should move to live with Yitzchak, they saw all the jewelry that Eliezer had. And you know what their first thought was? Let's kill him and rob him. In fact, they tried to poison his meal, sitting right there in the house when the whole story happened, in front of Rivka. Instead of looking at this, wow, we have an opportunity for our daughter, our sister, to go marry a very great man who she wants to marry. No. Let's poison him and steal his jewelry. In fact, an angel switched their places and Bethuel died because he himself was poisoned because an angel switched the place. So this is the type of person we're dealing with. And Rivka grew up in a home like that. And the way a person is raised is often what they think is normal. If a child is raised in a home with a lot of dysfunction, they only realize that it's not normal when they go out into the world and they see other families. When a person is raised with extreme wealth, they don't know that there are people who don't have as much as them, and they might be very entitled. So they go out in the world and they see that not everybody has as much as them. The way that you are raised up until a certain point, and you enter society, is what you think is normal. And Rivka was very young. In fact, she was 3 years old when she was mature enough to be ready to get married to Yitzchak. And she was the epitome of kindness, which means that her internal goodness and her moral compass that guided her to do what was right was from such a deep place within her that she was able to know what was right, even though she was raised by terrible people. And she was able to do what was right and not be influenced by her family and the people around her. And if you can imagine that Lavan, her brother, this sly, conniving man, was popular and everybody looked up to him, well, then you can imagine what everybody else was like. Because if you look up to someone like that, it means you share that ideal value system. So this was the life that Rivka was living, and yet she was extreme kindness. That tells us what an incredible person she was. That tells us how real her kindness was. She wasn't putting on a show because she wanted to get married. She wasn't like, oh, this guy might want to find a match for Yitzchak. Well, let me go be kind. It'll be to my advantage. It was from a place so honest and so real and so pure. And Eliezer saw that. And that's how he knew that Yitzchak would be perfect with this woman. In fact, when Rivka came to Yitzchak and they got married, they lived in the tent where Sarah had previously been. Now, in those days, families lived together. Avram was still alive, but when Rivka entered Sarah's tent, Torah tells us that the three miracles that existed in Sarah's tent during her lifetime reappeared when Rivka entered the tent. Those three miracles, one was that her bread, her challah, remained fresh the entire week. The second was that her candles, her Shabbat candles, remained lit the entire week. And the third was that the cloud of glory, the Shekhinah of God, rested hovering above her tent. And as soon as Rivka entered the tent and they were married, those three miracles resumed, which tells us that she wasn't just the perfect fit for Yitzchak, but that she actually personified the same ideals that Sarah had, which means that not only was she a good wife for Yitzchak, but she is perfect to be the second of our matriarchs. She followed that path. In fact, the matriarchs serve as the representation of what a Jewish woman should be, which is why those three miracles existed, because each miracle connects with one of the three mitzvot that is entrusted to a Jewish woman. There are three mitzvot that are specifically given to women. And that means not that only a woman could do it, because a man could do those mitzvahs as well, and should if the situation arises. But when the woman does this mitzvah, the gates of heaven are open for her. And she brings a feminine energy into the world when she does these mitzvahs. The first one is the mitzvah of hafrashat challah, which is in connection with the bread, the challah that was fresh all week. The second is hadlakat nerot, the lighting of the Shabbat candles, which is a special time for women, which is again the candles that were lit all week. And the mitzvah of mikveh, taharat mishpacha, when a woman goes to the mikveh as part of a Jewish marriage, that which is connected with the idea of the cloud above the tent, because when a Jewish man and a Jewish woman are married according to Jewish law and go to the mikveh and learn the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha, they bring the Shekhinah, the cloud of glory, into their home, into their bedroom, into their relationship. And each of these three mitzvot are so valuable. And each of these three mitzvot represents the beauty of what a woman, a Jewish woman, should bring into her home, into her life. And that is what we see from Rivka. So what qualified her to be the woman who should marry Yitzchak, who should be the mother of Yaakov, who will birth the tribes, to be the woman who carries on Sarah's legacy? It was her kindness. It was her character. And more importantly, it was the fact that she maintained her character despite her negative surroundings. She wasn't influenced by the negative forces that surrounded her. Now, it's interesting that when Eliezer came to the home of Rivka and spoke to Bethuel and Lavan about taking Rivka, the Torah tells us in this Torah portion that Eliezer said, I came today. Today is the day that I arrived. And Rashi, the commentator on the Chumash and the Torah, asks the question, why does he say, today I came? Like, what does it matter what day I came? Obviously, you just showed up at the well. Like, what's the significance of saying today? And Rashi explains that what he means is, I left today and I came today. It was a one-day trip. Now, if he would have turned on his GPS, it would have told him that it was a 17-day journey. I believe 17, I might be mistaken, but it was a very long journey. I believe 17 days. And yet, he was able to complete the trip in one day. And Rashi goes on to explain that God performed a miracle of Kefitzat HaDerech, which means shortening his trip, that he was able to travel the distance of many days in one day. And with these words, Eliezer was conveying the urgency that God made him show up so quickly, and it's very important that they leave right away. And the Rebbe asks in a talk that the Rebbe gave, the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave, explaining the deeper meaning of this idea, the Rebbe asks, why does Rashi have to tell us about this miracle? And why was this miracle so important? I mean, if we think about it, she was 3 years old. She wasn't like, a very old woman that like, quick, we got to marry her off, And miracles don't happen without a very important reason when they are supernatural miracles. Miracles happen all the time, but they're concealed in nature. Why was this miracle so important? Why was it so important that he come on that day? And there should be as little time as possible. And the Rebbe explains that as soon as Rivka was old enough, and the Torah tells us it was the day that she turned 3, and she was considered old enough then, she reached the age of maturity that she was able to leave home. As soon as she was old enough that she was ready to leave home, she had to be taken out of there as soon as possible. Because when a person is in an environment that is a negative influence and could potentially harm them, and not just physically harm them, but harm their character, they need to get out of there. And if a person is in a relationship that is negatively influencing their character, then they need to remove themselves from that situation. And they need to get the help they need to remove themselves from that situation. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily leaving. If a person has a coworker who isn't the best person to be around, it doesn't mean you need to quit your job. Although sometimes, as we know, it requires leaving if it's a bad situation. But we need to remove ourselves from their influence. We need to separate ourselves from negative influences. Because our character, our value, is worth so much more than staying in a negative situation. And the fact that the Torah tells us about this shows us that it's a good thing to surround ourselves with positive influences. And we shouldn't feel like we're a coward if we have to remove ourselves from a bad situation. It's actually a sign of strength. It's worth performing a miracle to be surrounded by good people. It's worth performing a miracle to leave a negative situation for the sake of joining a positive one. For Rivka to leave the home of Lavan and go to Yitzchak. And so we notice in the life of Rivka, just in the story surrounding the marriage, we see such profound lessons. The importance of character and kindness, and the importance of putting ourselves in situations that help us grow and improve our character. So God is telling us your character, your kindness, your compassion, your love for other people is so important. But don't worry if you're not perfect. I'm giving you the solution. The solution is surround yourself with good people. And that will help you. That will help each one of us become better. It will help us improve and evolve and enhance our own lives so that we can be in equally befitting relationships, that we can form positive partnerships, and we can maintain good behaviors. That's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for our family. That's what we want for everyone. At the end of the day, we want to be good people. We want our children to be good people. We want the people that we are surrounded by to be good people. What does it mean to be good? It means to be kind. When we're focused on others rather than ourselves. And this is the beauty of what Yitzchak and Rivka formed as a partnership. Because Yitzchak, his persona, the attribute that defined his life was the character which in Hebrew is called Gevura, which was in contrast to Abraham. Abraham personified chesed. Chesed is kindness. We learned about Abraham that Abraham was constantly giving. He had an open home. He was always looking for guests. Even right after he had his circumcision, he was sitting outside looking for guests because all he wanted to do was give and share and teach. He was constant chesed, kindness. Yitzchak was the opposite of that. Now, the opposite of kindness is not stingy. It is not a negative trait. The opposite of chesed in the Torah is gevura. Gevura is actually translated as strength and discipline. Yitzchak's life was a very disciplined life. His purpose in life was not focused on giving to other people. That was not what God wanted from him. Of course, he gave to other people. Of course, he was kind. Of course, he was generous, but that wasn't his life's mission. His life's mission was to work on himself, to better himself through discipline, through holding back from doing negative things. There's an explanation that our sages teach us for the reason why we have two hands. Why do we have two hands? One is to give and one is to pull back. Pulling back doesn't mean to take back. It means to pull ourselves back from taking that which we shouldn't be taking, from doing what we shouldn't be doing. So one hand is for action, to do what's right. The other hand is to stop ourselves from doing what's right. So we need to sometimes hold ourselves back. If we only had one hand, we wouldn't have another one to stop ourselves from doing the wrong thing. Yitzchak's life was all about discipline, strength, to be firm, to know what's right, and to never veer off the path. And when Rivka was being matched with Yitzchak, you might look at it and say, well, why is the kindest girl being matched up with a person who was most disciplined? Doesn't seem like such a good match. What is it, the yin and yang? Well, the truth is that what God is teaching us is that discipline and kindness are not mutually exclusive. In fact, you need to have both. There is a way to be firm and still be kind. There is a way to be strong and still be loving. And Yitzchak and Rivka together form that perfect balance that we try to achieve in our lives. So Yitzchak and Rivka together create the image that we need to aspire for, that we need to look up to, and that we try to bring into our own lives, which is the idea that when we're with other people and we need to be firm, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with a child, a student, a spouse, anything, there are times when we need to set boundaries. And we should set boundaries. Yitzchak teaches us the importance of boundaries with his discipline. We should remember to do it in a kind way. Setting boundaries and holding ourselves back, and setting boundaries means for other people and for ourselves as well. Setting boundaries for ourselves. Knowing what our values are, what we do and what we do not do, which lines we don't cross, And as we grow in our relationship with Hashem, the boundaries change. And we set new lines which we shouldn't cross. And we need to do that with kindness. When it comes to setting boundaries for other people, we need to do it in a kind way. And when it comes to setting boundaries for ourselves, we need to be kind to ourselves as well. And give ourselves grace, and give ourselves love, and give ourselves compassion. Because we're not perfect. And sometimes it's hard for us to set boundaries. Sometimes it's hard for us to take upon ourselves restrictions that we shouldn't be doing things, and we decide that we want to grow in our connection to God by forming this restriction. Or we want to stop ourselves from doing something that was a bad habit that we want to break. We need to be kind to ourselves. We're not always going to be perfect. And we won't always be perfect about our discipline. But it has to come together with kindness. And that is why Yitzchak and Rivka were the perfect match. That is also why Eliezer knew that the character he needed to look for in Rivka, in the potential wife for Yitzchak, had to be someone with kindness so that they could balance each other. And eventually, when they have children, to be able to balance each other, to parent their children with this balance of discipline and kindness together. So we learn this beautiful personality, this beautiful characteristic, and this beautiful bar that we can set for ourselves. Who we can be from the characters in this week's Torah portion, which is Rivka and Yitzchak together. Yitzchak, as we said previously, was not allowed to leave Israel. He always needed to be surrounded by holiness. The land of Israel is a holy land. The air in Israel is holy. The streets in Israel are holy. The atmosphere just is permeated with godliness and spirituality. And anyone who visits Israel, you can feel it. There's just a feeling in the air, wherever you are. You feel the spirituality. And Yitzchak was not allowed to leave that. And because Yitzchak's entire life was spent in this cocoon of holiness, he gave us, and we spoke about this last week and the week before, the idea of our matriarchs and patriarchs are our actual parents, which means that they give us attributes that become part of our DNA, which means we just have access to it. Yitzchak gave us the ability, through living a life that was completely a cocoon of spirituality, to create our own cocoon of spirituality, our own holy environment, wherever we are. Because God didn't want all of us to live in Israel, and the proof of that is that we're sitting here in Miami. If God wanted us to all be in Israel our whole lives, well, that's where we would be, because God's plans, there's not a plan B. What God plans is what happens. So we are meant to be here. So if we're meant to be here and we're not in Israel, then how could we really learn from Yitzchak, who never left Israel? The idea is to create our own environment of holiness, create our own surroundings of spirituality, to surround ourselves by people and by projects and by community and by family. And family means your biological family and the family that you create for yourself, that make you feel connected spiritually. And when we have that cocoon, we can keep disciplined because we can strengthen each other. It's so much easier to remain strong in our connection with God when we're surrounded by growing people. We're surrounded by people who share the same values. And once we create that nuclear cocoon, I guess, that nuclear family for ourselves, we can tap into it even when we're not actually in that place. So again, the contrast of Rivka and Yitzchak. Yitzchak never left the spiritual life. Rivka grew up in a place that was the exact opposite of spirituality. How on earth were they good for each other? Rivka's family was liars and cheaters and swindlers. Yitzchak's family was Abraham and Sara. Were they a good match? Yes, because remember, family is nothing without the one, and she was the one. But not just that. Together, they formed that balance that we can look at and see as the guide, the map of what we should follow in our lives. We need to create for ourselves and find the space in our mind, the mindset of Yitzchak's life, the mindset of holiness, what we can tap into that helps us access our spirituality. And then we can be spiritual even when we are surrounded by other people that are not, and not get influenced, like Rivka. I'll give you an example. I was having a discussion with a psychologist who was saying that the idea of affirmations is very powerful if it's an honest affirmation. Someone who is struggling with their weight, for example, and does not like the way they look. If they look at the mirror and they tell themselves, I love my body, I love my body. It's a nice affirmation, but it will not help them feel good about themselves because it's not true. They don't love their body. What would be a good affirmation? I'm working on trying to love my body. And if you look at yourself and you tell yourself, I am trying to love my body, I am doing things to help me love my body, eventually that's something you can connect with. Or if someone has this affirmation, I tell this to myself all the time, and I am going to a calm space. Now, if I would tell myself, I am calm, I am calm, I am calm. No, I'm not. I'm not calm. Everything's really stressful and the house is flying and dinner's not ready. I'm not calm. That's not a true statement. So I tell myself, I am calm, I am calm. The back of my brain is telling me, no, you're not. You're such a liar. Like, that's not going to help me be calm. But if I tell myself, I am going to a calm space, I am trying to calm down. Now that's something that we can work on. Yeah, that I tell myself a lot more often. And I have to go to a calm space in my mind to become calm, even when the house is flying. So we need to find that space in our mind that is spiritual for us. Our godly affirmation, whether it's, I am connected to God. I am connected to God. I am proud of my Judaism. I have a godly soul. I have a Jewish family that looks up to me. I have a synagogue that I belong to. Whatever it is, that space in our mind becomes our spiritual cocoon. Sometimes it's a prayer. We have in our mind, Shema Yisrael. We say the prayer. Then when we are in a situation that's like Rivka's life, surrounded by people who are not of the same values as us, we can go to that space and not become influenced by others, but actually be able to influence them. And whatever it is in our lives that keeps us grounded, that keeps us feeling holy, that is a reminder, whether it's when we wake up in the morning and we're not sure what kind of day we're going to have, but we start off our day with the words, Moda ani lefanecha. We're thankful to God. She'achazarta bi nishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha. God, you gave me back my soul. And if we think about that, and we're thankful to God for giving me back my soul, when I'm having a day that is not going my way, and I can tell myself, but God gave me back my soul today. That becomes our holy Eretz Yisrael that we can become a part of to help us maintain our stability, maintain our positivity, maintain our kindness, maintain our growth, because that cocoon surrounds us. So Yitzchak and Rivka together form the basis of who we want to be, of what we can look up to, and how we can aspire other people. And the beauty that we have is that these qualities are inside of us because they are our mothers and fathers. We need to bring it out into the open. It's in our soul. We just need to uncover it. We just need to access it. We just need to develop it. Just need to use it and then it will come. So that is the beauty of this week's Torah portion and how we can find ourselves in this week's Torah portion. We might not be able to imagine ourselves in the storyline of a 3-year-old girl leaving her home to travel with someone to go get married and then live her life and become the mother of the Jewish people. That's not our story. But the life of someone who builds her character despite her surroundings and creates a life that is cocooned in holiness so that she can influence her surroundings positively, even though she doesn't come from a positive background. She takes her challenges and still rises above. That's a story that we can connect with. A person who is balancing kindness and discipline, setting boundaries while still staying loving and kind and compassionate. That's someone we can connect with. That is us in the Torah portion. And that is the Torah portion in our lives. So this is the story of Parshas Chayei Sara, and this is the story of each one of us. So please unmute yourself and share if you have any questions or anything you want to share. I love if anybody wants to share anything, an experience that they may have had or something that they connect with where they saw themselves or can see themselves in this Torah portion. I'd love for you all to share.